Hello guys, today I'll be doing a versus video, and the albums that we'll be comparing today are Pleasant Shade of Grey by Fate's Warning and Here in the Now Frontier by Queensryche. Now, why did I compare these albums? Well, these albums came out in the same year, in 1997, and 1997 wasn't necessarily the strongest year for progressive metal, and also these albums are, of course, from bands that are considered pioneers in the progressive metal movement. And basically in this video I'll be talking about which album I personally prefer and why. So right off the bat, the album I prefer is Pleasant Shade of Grey. But yeah, with this album, definitely a unique album and Fate's Warning discography. It's different, unique, and has an interesting dark atmosphere to it. The album is a bit more moody compared to some of their other albums, especially some of their more earlier work. But yeah, overall, it's an album that might take multiple listens in order to fully grasp everything that's going on, maybe, but I'd say it's definitely worth giving multiple listens, because I think the album kind of underrated. It is, of course, a concept album, and some of my favorite tracks on the album are probably part 2 and part 3 and the album closer. Those are probably the ones that I probably return to the most, but of course there are other great tracks on the album too. But also, this was when we're getting closer to the end of the 90s, and Fate's Warning wasn't really able to keep hold of the popularity that they got from Parallels. The popularity started decreasing a little bit as time has gone on later in the 90s, but even though that's the case, I still think this album is worth checking out if you haven't heard it, and if you didn't like it at first, definitely give it another chance for sure. But now with Queensryche, we have Here in the Now Frontier, and this is of course the last album with Chris DeGarmo, and the album just kind of feels a bit uninspired, sometimes a bit boring and kind of dull. But even at the end of the day, I still think it's an okay album. I don't think it's their worst. I think you'll get to hear some of their worst later on after this album. Specifically albums like Dedicated to Chaos and Frequency Unknown. Those are some of the band's worst, absolutely. And certainly worse than this. But I think this album does have some decent tracks like Son of the Times and Cuckoo's Nest, Get a Life and Voice Inside. Saved, I think, is a decent, okay track, and Hit the Black, I remember being somewhat okay. Not the most memorable song out there, but decent. But the second half, to be honest, can really drag sometimes. And this album doesn't really have some of the band's best work. It doesn't really have any of that. But sure, there might be a few songs on the album that are worth checking out, of course, if you haven't heard it or if you're new to Queensryche. But when it comes to ranking their albums, this album is in I guess the bottom half, or maybe closer to the middle. But yeah, Here in the Now Frontier, definitely nowhere near one of the best, but again, I'd say a decent album and has its share of some somewhat okay tracks. But again, I'm going to have to go with Pleasant Shade of Grey. But anyways, let me know your thoughts. Let me know which album you prefer and why and all that good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and take care.